Thank you, Bailey. And I'm so glad there are so many people here wanting to talk about mosquitoes in February, a time when you're probably not thinking about them that much, but at MMCD, we think about mosquitoes year round. And so I'm Alex Carlson. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for Mosquito Control. With me is Dr. Nancy Reed. And together we put together this presentation and we'll be available to answer questions throughout. I've been told it's been best to hold questions to the end, but I will have some questions for you. I built some trivia into the presentation, so you can just raise your hand if you think you know the answer as we're going along. But I always like to start off with kind of the mind-blowing reason for why mosquito control exists, why around the world people study mosquitoes and dedicate so much time to mosquitoes. And that's because they're actually the deadliest animal on the planet. Mosquitoes are responsible for more human death than any other animal on Earth. And this, as this infographic demonstrates, more than even people. Mosquitoes kill more people than, wars and homicides and other tragic events like that. About 108 billion people have ever lived on the planet Earth. It's estimated that mosquitoes have killed about 52 billion people. So almost half of everybody who's ever died has died as a result of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes have altered the trajectory of world events. They believe Alexander the Great was killed by malaria, which is a mosquito-borne disease. The world map would look differently today if it weren't for mosquitoes. Some scientists even believe that throughout the history of time, mosquitoes have altered human DNA because of our relationship with this insect. And these facts are mostly from a great book that I recommend for both history and entomology nerds alike. It's called The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator by Timothy Weingard, and he's a historian. But I always like to say, I've seen a lot of horror movies about sharks and snakes and other things, but where are the horror movies about the real danger, mosquitoes? I think that would sell a lot of tickets. So in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about just an overview of who we are at MMCD, go into the details about mosquitoes, the life cycle and habitat, some different species that will be good to know, talk about integrated pest management, the steps that we take to control mosquitoes and why we do that. And then the number one question we get starting around this time of year is, how are mosquitoes going to be in 2024? How are they going to be this summer? And so I have a slide kind of giving a preview of what we know so far. There's still a lot of unknown, obviously. And then just some resources and maps and information that we have as well. But first of all, MMCD, the Metropolitan Mosquito Control District, serves the 7 counties in the metro area. We were established in 1958 by state statute, and our governance is the elected county commissioners. So every year, commissioners from the various counties in our service area are selected to serve on our commission. They determine our budget, they oversee our operations, they're kind of the boss. We have about 2,900 square miles in our service area, which is over 3 million people. We do our best to serve everybody. Obviously, it's hard to get 2 people to agree on things. So with 3 million people, there's a lot of different ideas for what needs to be done. So we do our best to serve the widest population possible. We have over 84,000 wetland habitats. And the reason that's so important will come up. But wetlands are where mosquitoes develop. And so it's very important for us to have these areas mapped so that we can keep track of mosquito development each summer. And then 30,000 woodland habitats, and our funding comes from property taxes. So everybody who lives in so a small portion of those property taxes goes to fund mosquito control, similar to how the Met Council is operated. For a median house in Washington County, which is one of the counties that breaks it down, it's about $12 per year for an average house. So I think it's a pretty good deal. All right, first trivia question. Here we go. And I do have some fabulous prizes if you want to come up and grab one, or you can wait till the end. I got pencils and stickers, and you can't take any mosquitoes with you, but you can come look at them. The question is, how many mosquito species are there in the entire world? Worldwide. Anybody know how many? Want to take a guess? Pretty close, actually. Pretty close. The answer is 3,000. So there's about 3,000. There's more than 3,000, just slightly more than 3,000 species in the world. Now let's zoom into our part of the world. How many species do we have just here in Minnesota that are established here? Any guesses? 50? 15. 50 was a little closer, so I'll pretend you said 50. There's 52, actually. There's 52 species here in Minnesota, and those are ones that are established. We do have some visitors that come up every year from other areas. We say 52 are the ones that survive our winters. They tend to come back year after year. Interestingly, of these 52, only about half are what we consider a human problem or a pest problem, meaning they bite people, or they can carry a disease that can eventually get to people. So about half the species that we have leave humans alone, leave mammals alone, which is just an interesting, when we talk about mosquitoes good versus bad. A lot of mosquitoes don't even bother people. So that would be, I guess, for the good column of mosquitoes. Another important reason to explain that there's 52 species is because in this presentation, we talk a lot in generalities. You know, most mosquitoes do this, or most mosquitoes behave this way, but not all of them do. There's some interesting species that kind of act a little bit differently. So I'll try to, explain where I can on how certain mosquitoes act certain ways, but typically I'll talk in generalities. The most common mosquitoes will act the ways that we explain. And that starts by understanding the life cycle. So if you're familiar with the insect metamorphosis, you've probably seen something like this before. It starts with the eggs. The eggs hatch and they become this mosquito larva. The larva lives in the water and they're filter feeders, and then they develop to become the pupa. The pupa is no longer feeding. That's kind of like their cocoon stage where they're developing their adult body parts, and then they come out of the pupa as an adult mosquito. And those are the mosquitoes that you're probably familiar with because they're the ones that are out of the water, searching for blood meals oftentimes, bothering people and other animals. And then the females lay the eggs and the process starts all over again. And I'm going to go through each of those stages a little bit more detail here. And we got some videos that'll hopefully work. So when the mosquitoes lays eggs, there's two main types of egg-laying mosquitoes that we have. We have what we call the floodwater mosquitoes. They lay their eggs individually on moist soil or on the banks of water, whether it's a pond or a swamp or something, and then they wait for the rain to trigger a hatch, or they wait for the water level to rise to trigger a hatch. So they're very dependent on precipitation and snowfall and rain and stuff like that. Then we have what we call our standing water mosquitoes, and mosquito eggs, and they lay their eggs directly on a source of standing water. That can be man-made, like containers or buckets or waste tires, things like that hold stagnant water. And that can also be natural habitats, permanent water sources that are flooded up. Even in drier years. Each egg laying event can produce 100 to 300 eggs. So now you can see why mosquitoes can become so abundant. Next trivia question. This one always blows people's minds. How long can mosquito eggs survive unhatched? Unhatched mosquito eggs. How long is it going to survive? Any guesses? 3 years? You're pretty close. Yeah. Somebody else started 10 years? Few weeks? We're closer in the year range. It's actually up to 5 years. So for floodwater mosquitoes, the unhatched eggs can survive for up to 5 years. So that just shows, we've had a couple dry years, but that could mean that there's a bank of mosquito eggs that are still, surviving that could hatch if we have a wet year coming up. So past the egg, we move on to the larva. This is going to show a couple videos of what the larva look like up close. These are the mosquito babies. So after the eggs hatch, the larva is in the water for most mosquitoes, it's about 4 to 6 days. It's dependent on the water temperature. So warmer waters, they'll develop a little quicker. The cooler waters of the early spring, the mosquitoes develop a lot slower. Mosquitoes are filter feeders, so they feed on microorganisms that come by. In a second, you'll get to a close-up of the mouth parts and get to see what that looks like. There you go. Feeding, feeding, feeding. And they do have to breathe. So as you can see, these are near the surface. Mosquito larva tends to stay near the surface because they do require oxygen, so they do have to breathe to survive. They can float down and stay under the water for a little while, but they tend to stay near the surface. So when we're doing our surveillance, we're skimming along the surface trying to find the presence of mosquito larvae. So they eat bacteria, they eat protozoa, they eat yeast, algae, other microorganisms, and they're eaten by... Never mind. I got a lot of these trivia questions built in. So what's a predator that might eat mosquito larvae? Fish. Yeah, that's a big one. Fish. Frogs. Yep. Frogs. Yeah, you can shout out if you know any other ones. Bats eat some adult mosquitoes, but mosquito larvae, since they're in the water, that's more aquatic animals. So other insect larvae, like diving beetle larvae, frogs, crayfish, fish is a big one. And dragonfly larvae or dragonfly naiads. There's a little video of that in action. A little underwater hunter going for his lunch. Oh, get it. There we go. Delicious. So dragonflies are a big predator of mosquitoes. Both the dragonfly larvae eat mosquito larvae, and then adult dragonflies eat adult mosquitoes. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's delicious. After the larva, they develop to the pupa. And like I said, this is like the cocoon stage. They're no longer eating at this point. So there's nothing you can feed a mosquito pupa to control it. The only thing you do is suffocate it or get it out of the water. So this is what it looks like when the larva molts. The pupal stage for most mosquitoes lasts about 1 to 2 days. So if you're doing like the full length from when the egg hatches. It's about 4 to 6 days as larva and about 1 to 2 days as pupa. So we say it's about a week, 5 to 8 days for when these eggs hatch before they come out of the water. There you go. See the molt in process. I also forgot to mention the instars have multiple stages as well, where they grow. It's called instars. So we have the first instars, which are really, really tiny mosquito larvae, all the way up to fourth instar, where they're a little bit bigger, about ready to pupate, more visible by the human eye. And then they kind of curl up and they look like a little floating shrimp. And that's what they are in the pupa stage. And you can see they are still very active. So unlike, a chrysalis for the caterpillar, which might not move very much, mosquito pupa are still quite active under the water, swimming around. They still need to breathe, so they've got two trumpets up at the top of their pupa shell or casing to breathe. So they do need to stay near the surface of the water, and that's when they're developing all the mosquito parts, the wings and antennae and everything like that. All right, this one people should know. Is it the male or female mosquito that bites, or both? Female, you guys are no. It's like you've been to some bug workshops before or something like that. Yes, only the female mosquitoes bite, and it's because they need the protein in the blood meal to produce their eggs. So that's why the females bite. So, which brings you to the question, what do males eat? So what is the food source of an adult mosquito? The female needs the blood as a protein source to produce offspring. What does the male mosquito eat? Any guesses? You got it, nectar, yes. So most male and female mosquitoes feed on flower nectar, and that's their sugar source. So that's how they provide energy for themselves, is they eat the nectar from flowers. Now we can see another video of a mosquito emerging from the water. So mosquitoes require shallow, stagnant water in order to emerge. And you can see from this video, it's difficult for them to get out of their pupal shell and to get out into the water, shake themselves off and dry out. So if there's a lot of disruption to that water, if there's a lot of waves and stuff like that, they're going to have a harder time getting out. As I mentioned, water temperature determines the speed of development. But usually it's about a week, 5 to 8 days from the egg hatch to an adult mosquito emergence. And here they go. So then they use the surface tension of the water to dry out, and then they fly out. And the females go in search of a blood meal. Males, go in search of a female. Let's do some math. You guys ready for some math on a Sunday? Those of you who are at school age, I see some kids back there, maybe not math on a weekend, but we're gonna do a little bit of math here just to kind of show what mosquitoes can do. So let's start with one female mosquito. She gets a blood meal and lays 300 eggs, half of which are female. So let's say 150 females. So now we got 151 female mosquitoes. So that because the mom's still around. So times another 300 eggs, we're up to 45,300, half of which are female. Third generation comes along. Those 22,650 lay another 300 eggs each. So 6,795,000 mosquitoes, 3 million of which are females. And you see where this is going? Fourth generation comes along, 3 million times another 300. We're at 1.3 billion mosquitoes, all in less than 1 month from one female mosquito. Now, obviously, not every egg is going to hatch. Not every mosquito is going to get a blood meal. But it just goes to show that mosquitoes are really able to, overwhelm an area if they have the right conditions. If we're getting a lot of rain, if we're getting a lot of moisture, if we're getting, those hot conditions that mosquitoes love, they can really become abundant quick. And if you've ever been to, the boundary waters in June or any areas where it's really good mosquito habitat, you know how much they can become abundant. All right, so now the adult mosquito, they go out in search of their blood meal. So this is a female mosquito on the hunt. And when she finds a blood meal, she uses the long needle-like appendage called the proboscis to penetrate the skin. They also inject the bite with saliva that numbs the area. And that's also what causes the itchy bump that we all get from a mosquito bite. The mosquito spits on the area and she injects saliva, and we have an allergic reaction to that saliva, which causes the itchy bump. And everybody has kind of their own reaction. Some people get minor bumps that don't last very long. Some people get giant welts that seem to last for days and days. Just kind of depends on your body chemistry and how it reacts to the mosquito saliva. So that's what it looks like. And the video here shows the mosquito, dripping some blood out the back. And I've been told that they only take in the amount of blood that they need to produce eggs. And so I've heard when I talk to school kids, they say, I hear if you flex your muscle, you make the mosquito explode and all the blood comes out. That's not what's happening. If any blood is not going in, it means it's just more blood than they need in order to produce their eggs. So best way is to slap them. Don't flex. All right. I mentioned we have 52 species here. We're not going to go through all 52 because that would take all day. And honestly, most of them aren't going to concern people at all. So I just highlighted a couple ones that I think are interesting. First one is called the Aedes vexans, or the common name is the summer floodwater mosquito. Usually in the summer, when people are complaining about mosquitoes, they're complaining about Aedes vexans. They're the most common summer floodwater mosquitoes we have in most years. Past couple years have been a little unusual, but they're still pretty abundant. And they're very rain dependent. So when we have normal rainfall in the year, we see a lot of those Aedes vexans out. They lay their eggs on the soil next to a body of water, which hatches after a rain event. Another species that you should know is the Culex mosquitoes, and that's the one that we spend a lot of time talking about and studying, is because this is the vector of West Nile virus in Minnesota. So the Culex mosquito breeds in standing water, can be permanent standing water, but oftentimes it's man-made structures like waste tires or catch basins that are on the side of the road that hold water. So the Culex species is what we're concerned about because they can transmit West Nile. And I have more about some mosquito disease coming up later. Fun name to say is Coquilitidia perturbans. It took me about 5 years working at MMCD before I spelled that right on the first try. But we call it the cattail mosquito. And when I say not every mosquito follows the same pattern, this is a great example because this species actually overwinters as larvae. So their eggs hatch in the fall and they attach to the root of vegetation, oftentimes cattails, which is where they get their name from. And they get oxygen from that vegetation and they survive under the ice all winter long. And then in the spring, they work their way up to the surface and then they emerge once per year in a single brood, usually right around the beginning of July. So we usually see a big uptick in mosquitoes right around the 4th of July, and that's because of the cattails coming out. They have one brood per year, and then they lay their eggs, and the cycle starts all over. So they stay in the water, obviously, a lot longer than a week because that's just a totally different habit that they have. Aedes triceriatus is just another one that I'll mention. It's called the tree hole mosquito. It is a species that develops in standing water. We call them a container breeding mosquito because they're often in waste tires or tree holes, which, the name the tree hole explains that. But they're the vector of lacrosse encephalitis, which is a disease that can affect younger people. So it's another species that we're very concerned about that we try to make sure that we're monitoring. Mosquito habitats look like these. We have permanent water sources, shallow ponds, swamps, wetlands that tend to hold stagnant water even in drier years. They can hold, that just enough water for mosquitoes to find a nice home. Then we have our floodwater sites. These are any areas that are designed to flood up when it rains. So, cities design, floodplains and culverts to get the water away from homes and buildings. They tend to flood up and hold water for a couple of days after a rain event. Mosquitoes will lay their eggs there and they'll produce from that. And then mosquitoes love to find habitat in our garbage. So whether that's containers that we leave out, buckets or loose tarps on a boat or a kiddie pool that you forget to empty out, bird baths that you leave, uncleaned. But then also, catch basins on the side of the roads are designed to keep debris out of waterways, but they also end up holding a lot of standing water. Waste tires are a great mosquito source because they get hot and murky and mosquitoes find a great habitat within there. So we actually have a program where we'll come and pick up and recycle any waste tires that are found in the metro area at no cost. So if you find any, call us. We want to get rid of that potential public health risk. Speaking of mosquito-borne disease, that's kind of the next section I've got here. So anybody know? I've mentioned a couple already, so this should be easy, but can you name a mosquito-borne disease that we have here in Minnesota? Somebody said Lyme disease. That's a good guess. That's actually a tick-borne disease. So I'll have a little bit about ticks in here too, but that's the #1 vector-borne disease. Ticks are a vector as well, but not transmitted by mosquitoes. Yep, West Nile. Yep, that's the #1. Then I mentioned lacrosse encephalitis, and then a couple that aren't as abundant. Eastern equine encephalitis. There have never been a human case, but there have been horse cases. Jamestown canyon virus and dog heartworm. And I always put this little snapshot up here because it's just a fun history fact, but the CDC was actually founded as a mosquito control agency. When the CDC was first developed, their singular focus was eradicating malaria, which is a mosquito-borne illness. So if in the 1940s and 50s, people knew the CDC trucks that would do a lot of the fogging for mosquitoes at the time because they were trying to find and eliminate mosquito habitat. So it's just kind of a cool, they have the whole history on the CDC website, but a lot of people know and trust the CDC. And so it's just interesting to see that part of their history. You know, mosquitoes were their origin story. But West Nile virus here in Minnesota is our number one concern. It's spread by the Culex species. Birds are the vertebrate hosts. So a bird will be carrying West Nile. A mosquito bites an infected bird, and then that same mosquito will bite a horse or a human, and that's how the disease is transmitted to us. We're what's considered dead end hosts. So I can't, if I get West Nile virus, I can't, give it to somebody else by coughing on them, and also a mosquito can't bite me that's not infected and then transmit it. Once I've got West Nile, it ends with me. But if I have West Nile, that means I'm probably in a habitat where mosquitoes are carrying West Nile. So everybody around me should take precautions. Most birds are not impacted by West Nile, but corvids, so ravens, blue jays, and crows have a high mortality rate. So oftentimes we get calls from people in the late summer, early fall saying, I found some dead blue jays or I found some dead crows. And that could be a sign that West Nile is starting to show up in an area. We used to go collect and freeze and test the birds for West Nile, but we found it's a lot cleaner to actually just test the mosquitoes. So this is a quick snapshot of West Nile virus in 2023. That's a map of Minnesota. This is from the CDC's website. They have a great resource called ArboNet, where you can kind of zoom into states and counties and just learn about all kinds of mosquito-borne illness. There were 27 cases in Minnesota, 3 fatalities last year. Interestingly, we collect and test mosquitoes, and we set our record last year for the percentage of mosquitoes that were testing positive for West Nile virus. 129 samples. Nile. Part of that is the subject of the drought. The mosquitoes that carry it aren't as affected by the drought. They can still thrive in drought conditions. It also just meant we were collecting fewer overall mosquitoes because of the drought. So that means more mosquitoes in the pools that we were collecting happen to have West Nile. But the lesson there, the message that I always try to spread when I mention this is that even in dry years, when there's not a lot of nuisance mosquitoes about, there are still mosquitoes around that could make you sick. So it's just a good message that, if you're out in the late summer, it's a drier year, so you're not getting bitten up by mosquitoes, it's still a good idea to, put on some bug spray, cover up, just take those precautions just to be safe. Because you don't want to risk that one mosquito bite that could be the one that could impact you. Then lacrosse encephalitis, the host for that is small mammals, so chipmunks, squirrels, raccoons. The mosquito bites them and then bites a person. Again, we're dead end hosts for lacrosse. What's interesting about lacrosse is it's what's called a transovarial transmission. So when that infected mosquito lays eggs, those mosquitoes that hatch will also be carrying the disease. So source reduction is very important for eliminating lacrosse. That's why we go and remove waste tires and fill tree holes and do all that stuff to try to remove their habitat to keep people safe. Other diseases that I'm not going to go into too detail about, but Jamestown Canyon is believed to be found in spring mosquito species. Triple E, Eastern equine encephalitis. This one is definitely on our radar. It's rare. There's never been a human case in Minnesota, but there is a very high mortality rate. It's about 30% mortality rate for humans. So there have been breakouts in Michigan and on the East Coast. So we're just making sure that we're monitoring the vectors of Eastern equine encephalitis to make sure that it doesn't become an issue in Minnesota. And then dog heartworm, another good reminder for pet owners. Summer is the time that your dogs are most susceptible to heartworm because it is a mosquito-borne disease. So that's when you want to make sure that you're putting on the flea and tick preventative and making sure they're not getting bitten up by mosquitoes, giving them their heartworm preventative in the summer. Your vet will also recommend you do it year-round. I recommend you do it year-round, but really make sure you do it in the summer. All right, so now that we know the mosquito life cycle and we know what's out there, it's important to talk about what we do, why we control mosquitoes, and how we control mosquitoes. So we at MMCD practice what's called integrated pest management, also referred to as integrated mosquito management, because we deal with other animals besides just mosquitoes like ticks and black flies. We call it integrated pest management. Basically, it's making sure that any mosquito control decisions are driven by surveillance. So not only are we identifying that there are mosquitoes in a habitat, but we're identifying them to the species to know the mosquitoes that we're trying to control are a species that we know will bite people and can harm people. So there's 3 important steps to IPM: surveillance, going out there and finding out where the mosquitoes are; identification, identifying them to species and determining if the problem exists; and then control, when necessary, using control methods. And then also making sure that we're using the safest methods to effectively control the target insects with no or minimal impacts to what we call our non-target species. We love insects. We love bugs. We want bugs to thrive, but we want to make sure that the bugs that are a public health risk are being controlled. And so that's why IPM is so important. It all starts with surveillance. Most of the times, if you see MMCD trucks or MMCD staff out in your community, they're doing surveillance. So we do a couple different types of surveillance. Sorry, people on Zoom, to step away from the microphone. But one of the main ways we do it is we do wetland surveillance. So we'll go put on the waders. We'll go out into a swamp or pond. I think this will be a video. We use a long-handled dipper. We skim along the surface, and then we look to see what we find. And obviously, there's a dipper that's full of mosquito larvae. Normally, we don't find this many at a single site, but they'll get a count for how many mosquito larvae we find per dip, get a total, kind of go around a perimeter of an area, get a total count so we can determine the abundance, and then they'll put it in a vial and send that sample vial back to our entomology lab in St. Paul, where we have entomologists and we have some seasonal staff that will do some taxonomy and identify them by species and determine, is it a species that we need to be concerned about? If it's a non-human biting species, we don't do anything to them. If it's a species that we know could be a disease vector or is a human nuisance mosquito, then we may take control. We also do adult mosquito control. So in that picture is a CO2 trap. We set up about 200 total traps, CO2 and other traps, every Monday night in the summer, all throughout the metro. We also do some human bait, where we use sweep nets and we stand out for about a minute and we let the mosquitoes come to us. And then for 2 minutes, we sweep around our head and our feet, because feet are really stinky and mosquitoes love it. And then we just kind of catch as many as we can. And then we wrap it up and we put it in, or what I do is I wrap it up and I put it in my freezer overnight and let whatever's in there die. And then in the morning, when my kids go to get their breakfast out of the freezer, they say, "Dad, there's a net full of bugs in the freezer. You left it in there again." And I say, "It's for science. It's important." But I bring it into our lab and they identify it by species and they can tell, what's in my area for that night as a snapshot. And then we do lots of different traps as well to collect more mosquitoes. That really helps to identify the disease vectors, where they're abundant, and then also just to make sure, if certain species are more abundant in certain areas, we can investigate to determine why there are so many. All right, so looking back, I know it's 2024 now. We've forgotten all about last year, but what do you think? Was 2023 above or below average when it comes to mosquitoes? Below? Anybody think it was above? So it's kind of a trick question. I put a trick question because the answer is kind of both. We had record snowfall in the winter prior to last summer, and that left a lot of standing water. The rivers were overflowing their banks, and so we saw a big surge in mosquitoes early in the year. So from late May to early June, mosquitoes were well above the 10-year average. So this kind of might be a little hard to see, but the red line represents 2023. The purple line represents the 10-year average. And then after about the first week in June, the rain just stopped, and we entered another drought year. And so the mosquitoes just declined. And that's kind of been the snapshot for the past couple of years. We've had pretty active springs for mosquitoes, and then summer has been very low. The green line is 2020, which Scott Larson, who put this together, put that on as kind of the last kind of normal year for precipitation, where there was big rainfalls and then a little bit of dry period. So normally we see a lot of spikes and valleys. We usually see that big surge around the beginning of July because of cattail mosquitoes. And then we see, every time there's a big rainfall, we see a spike and then it'll decline. But the past couple of years, we've seen the spring surge and then a gradual decline. But it's important to remember, I put that note at the end, Culex mosquito population was healthy last year. So they're not the most abundant mosquito, but they're out. Next step after surveillance is identify. So our lab in St. Paul will go through and they will identify the species, both the larval samples and the adult samples. For the adult mosquitoes, if we find Culex mosquitoes or West Nile vectors, they're separated out, and those can actually be tested on site for West Nile virus. So we have a vector ecologist on staff, Kirk Johnson, who will go and he will grind up the mosquitoes, and he uses a ramp test to determine if they have, West Nile presence in those mosquito samples. And then we can send alerts to public health departments within counties to say, Washington County is finding a fair number of West Nile mosquitoes, send some messaging out to make sure people are taking precautions. We put out these maps on our website every single week during the summer. So this is a snapshot of the mosquito picture for a given week. So the one on the left is early June, and the one on the right is August 7th. So you can see the difference. Earlier, we had a lot more mosquitoes, and every red rectangle or square is over 1,000 were collected in that trap in a given night. There's not a lot of red squares in August just because the mosquitoes declined, and it was very strange, very unusual to be sitting out in the evening in August last summer and not having any mosquito bites. And then once we've identified them to species, that's when the control decisions come in. So there's three primary methods to control mosquitoes. You can do larval control, which is controlling them when they're in the water, adult control, which is controlling them when they're flying mosquitoes, or reducing breeding habitat. We as MMCD, we consider ourselves a larval control agency. The vast majority of the control measures that we're taking are to control the larval mosquitoes. So if you ever see our helicopters flying around, they're doing larval control over large swamps and wetlands, dropping the pellets of BTI and other materials. And then the reason why we focus on larval control is a couple. One, it's for our IPM plan, we find that larval control is the most effective because it's easier to get them when they're in a body of water than adult mosquitoes, which can be at anywhere there's vegetation. Also, that's a little bit more effective and targeted. Also, because we have a geographical advantage, we've got so much land in our service area, we can do widespread larval control, and it's really effective. Versus if we only did, let's say we only did Ramsey County, it was the only place we served. The adult mosquitoes would fly in from the neighboring counties. They don't understand borders, and so it would only be minimally effective. Whereas our geographic advantage lets us do that and be very effective. And then also, and most importantly, minimal non-target impact. The mosquito control products that we use for larval control are naturally occurring soil bacterium that are designed only to target mosquito larvae and black fly larvae and not harm other insect species. So they've been widely tested worldwide to make sure they're safe for pollinators and other aquatic animals, and they're very designed to be very safe to other animals that we're not trying to affect. Source reduction is something everybody can do, everybody can be a part of. If you take one thing away from this presentation, I want you to look around your yard this summer and make sure there's nothing holding standing water, because anything that holds water that gets stagnant and murky can become mosquito habitat. For rain barrels, put a screen on top of the rain barrel so that the mosquitoes can't get in there. Make sure you don't leave a kiddie pool out like that one in that picture, because that's very easy mosquito habitat. And make sure gutters are flowing, no clogs in gutters, and just removing anything from your yard that can become mosquito breeding sites. That's the way you can help MMCD, is just getting rid of that standing water. Larval control, I mentioned we do this from helicopter, but we also do this on the ground. We use like a leaf blower type backpack to disperse, and we've also started using drones a little bit to do some larval control as well. Doing some applicator drones really can target larger kind of medium-sized wetlands that are hard to get to on foot. But the great thing about larval control materials is they're specific to mosquito larvae. They're not toxic to people. Very minimal non-target effects. So it's a great product. You can buy any of these products. I got some up here, but you can buy them at Home Depot or at Menards. You can pick up some and do some of your own if you have wetlands that are outside of MMCD's service area. We do some adult control, mainly in response to disease vectors. So if we're finding out about West Nile, we can do some adult control to respond to potential remove any West Nile vectors. Also some extremely abundant years we might do a little more adult control, just to make sure that mosquitoes are not overwhelming an area. But for this, we mainly do backpack applications. So applying to the barrier of a vegetation, applying it from the backpack allows us to make sure we're really targeted. So we're avoiding anywhere that could be home to non-target insects like pollinators and stuff like that. We've never done an aerial application of adulticide. So if you see helicopters or drones, they're only doing larval control. Environmental precautions are very important to us. So we take several steps to ensure environmental safety. We work with the Department of Ag to make sure all of our staff are certified, to make sure that they're aware of the dangers of pesticides or any control materials that might be used. We train our staff on pollinator safety and how to identify habitat. We collaborate with groups like the Minnesota Hobby Beekeepers and the Monarch Joint Venture to make sure that their voices are being heard when it comes to any concerns that they might have. And then most importantly, we use the lowest effective treatment dosage of the least toxic control material for both larval and adult mosquitoes, and then continually reassess our practices. A recap of last year. Again, this was almost a year ago, but it was a third consecutive year of drought, so below average conditions, meaning most of the summer mosquitoes were below average, although the record snowfall left to a surge in May and June. 13 cases of West Nile in the district, and one case case of lacrosse encephalitis. I actually believe that I need to update that. I think there were 2 cases of lacrosse in the district. I just learned about another one last week. Deer ticks were once again collected in every county. So I don't talk a lot about ticks. This is the big year of bugs, and technically a tick is not a bug; it's an arachnid. So, but they are kind of in our fall under our umbrella as well. And deer ticks are abundant. And if you've been paying attention, this warm weather we've had, ticks are already out this year. Probably not necessarily today because there's a snow cover, but take those tick precautions now. And then black flies and other species that we monitor, they were higher than the year before, but below the 15-year average. This is the question we always get this time of year. How bad are mosquitoes going to be this summer? And a lot of people assume because we had a mild winter that mosquitoes are going to be really bad because they're all going to come out in full force. But a bigger factor for mosquitoes than temperature is precipitation. And we've had very low precipitation this year. I mean, this is the biggest snowfall that we've had this last 6-inch event. But other than that, there have been only like 1 to 2 inch snowfall events, if that. And so that means there's going to be less pooling stagnant water in the spring, which means there's less mosquito habitat. Now, for the past couple of years, spring mosquitoes have been very high, so they're probably not going to go away. There's probably going to be quite a few, but if we stay relatively dry, we might not see as big of a spring surge as we saw last year. One prediction that we can make with some confidence is the cattail mosquitoes, which is the species that causes that big surge right at the beginning of July. They've been low for the past couple of years, and they're more dependent on last year's rain. And so because of last year's lack of rain and the surveillance that we did last year for cattail mosquitoes, we're predicting another low year for cattail mosquitoes. So we may not see that big 4th of July surge unless, it's floodwater mosquitoes because of a lot of rain. And then another just reminder is warm winters means ticks are out earlier. So ticks come out earlier and stay out later than mosquitoes. So even when it's, late in the fall, you still got to take tick precautions. And early in the spring, on any warm day, you might see ticks out. So just when you're taking your dog for a walk, make sure you check them when you come back in to make sure they're not carrying ticks inside. We have a lot of great resources on our website. If you haven't been to our website, I highly recommend it. One of the cool features is we have a district maps function where you can pull up a map of the Twin Cities, type in any address or zoom into any area, and get a snapshot of all the wetlands being monitored in that area. And then once you click on that wetland, a little window will pop up like at the bottom where it says, the type of floodwater it is, if it has cattail mosquitoes or Culex mosquitoes. And then if you click on site info, there's about 20 years of history on what we found, what mosquitoes we found in that area, how many we found, what treatments were done, if any were done. So you can kind of look at and see, I got a pond right by me. I wonder what the status is there. And you can go click and see, when's the last time we were there and what we found. Kind of a cool feature. And I'm kind of wrapping up here. So the title of today's presentation was Mosquitoes, Good and Bad. And I've kind of talked about both throughout this presentation. So I thought I'd throw in just a summary slide. So mosquitoes are good. Well, not all mosquitoes bite humans. So not all species of mosquitoes bite people. So the others can be a food source for frogs, fish, and other animals. Mosquitoes are bad because they transmit diseases. They're responsible for human illness throughout history. Annoyance mosquitoes prefer to feed on humans. And mosquitoes are not a primary food source for many animals. My last trivia, as I get into my last couple of slides here, what's one way to protect yourself from being bit by mosquitoes? Bug spray, long sleeves, both good answers. Yep. Just never go outside. Although our summers are so fleeting in Minnesota, we want to be able to go out and enjoy them. So say next, yeah, be by somebody who's more smelly and attracts more mosquitoes. That can work. We have a whole page on our website. It's called our Residence Guide. It's got tips to protect yourself and your home and lots of different things that you can do to safely keep mosquitoes away. But the big things are, wear an EPA registered insect repellent, long, light, loose is what we say, long sleeves, light colors, loose fitting. Use a permethrin-based mosquito repellent for clothes and gear. If you're going hiking and you're going to be out, in the deeper woods, you can use a permethrin spray, and you can spray your shoes, your pants, your gear, and that'll help keep mosquitoes and ticks off. And then avoid outdoors during their peak feeding times. Mosquitoes are most active at dawn and dusk, so that's time you want to maybe go inside for a little bit and get out of the mosquito habitat. And then for your home, remove containers, make sure there's no standing water. Call us to recycle your waste tires. Keep grass and shrubs short, keeps ticks from venturing through your yard. One of my favorite tips, it's just so simple, but I found it's very effective, is if you have a seating area outside, put up an oscillating fan. Mosquitoes are very weak flyers, and just putting up a fan can keep them from getting on you as easily. And then if mosquitoes are really bad and you want to do something about it, we're very hesitant to recommend people take matters into their own hands when it comes to purchasing products and applying them. So we recommend hiring a Minnesota Department of Agriculture certified pesticide applicator, especially if you have like an outdoor wedding or something like that, and you know you want to do something about mosquitoes. Call a professional who can make sure that they're following the label precautions and doing everything safely. All right, and with that, I'll invite Nancy up here, and we can answer any questions that you might have here in the room or online.